the tens of thousands of slave laborers who were employed not just on this bunker, but throughout North Bremen, had to pass through residential neighborhoods on their way from the barracks. They were marched there every morning. You heard the story from the witness account, the two Russians who were executed on the spot for sabotage because they had cut a piece of shoe leather from their shoe to exchange for bread. Here you have that street I showed you on Google Street View earlier in the 1930s. This is a half hour long, a column of these slave laborers would march by. And some people would feel empathy towards them. And of course, people would also know that if you fraternized with them, if you helped them, if you gave them things, you too could get picked up by the Gestapo. So the newspapers reported about the presence of these foreign peoples among us and how to deal with them. Make them feel their place, make sure they know their place. They're guests here, and we are maintaining our right to assert, or what's Hausrecht in English? That our home is our castle, basically. And this is, in a way, strange, because foreign peoples, like I said, many of the workers who live here are descendants or first-generation immigrants coming from Poland or the German parts of Poland, native Polish speakers and so forth. They're not that different from many of the slaves who are marched to work here day in, day out. And they too have grown up with plenty of discrimination directed at them. In a street very similar to this was where my family lived at the time. My great-grandfather, his 10 children, including my grandmother after she got married. And this was not so far from the shipyard where everybody worked, and also the wool combing factory. And these are typical workers' housing. These are multi-generation, multi-family homes. Through this street one day, my aunt recalled in the 1980s, a starved-looking woman, clearly recognizable as an inmate of one of these labor camps, stumbled, crying for help, knocking on doors. At that point, everybody closed the curtains on their windows and pretended not to see anything. When she told that story in the 1980s, my grandmother said, "I have no recollection of this whatsoever." And these are people who acted out of fear because they've seen people taken away. My grandmother had seen her father taken away in front of her very eyes by the Gestapo, or actually rather by the SA. It wasn't even all that formal. But what happens if you live under a regime like that? You have to rationalize it, and in many situations, all you can do is try and play a long game where you sabotage, where you lend support when nobody is watching, or more likely, people numb themselves to the suffering and rationalize it and look the other way. And this is a whole lot more common, but nobody wants to admit that. Few people can admit that. So to say, I have no recollection of this whatsoever is much more likely for somebody than my aunt, 12 years old at the time, herself, without any enthusiasm, but in order to basically protect the family, joined the Hitler Youth Girls Club. So she knew how these people thought. She knew the racial ideology, this idea of supremacy that they harbored. And of course, the idea that you labor for people who have power in society and treat you as means to an end is common, is the day-to-day experience of this working class. On the bunker construction site, this is just, potentiated. So one of these places within that construction site, I want to pay special attention to, What you have here is the concrete mixing plant. And I mentioned before that the template they set here, the logistics of it, is still employed in large-scale construction projects in Germany. So the engineering and logistics knowledge accumulated under fascism really was part of a long-term project of capitalist modernization where there's an uninterrupted tradition. Here, the same spot that you saw in ruins previously is shown in the 1943 photograph, or 44. You see the concrete mixing drum, and then down here, you have the pipe where the concrete is pumped fresh into the construction site, and there it is poured onto the assembled steel, woven steel to make steel concrete. Here, you see it is actually part of a whole battery. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's half of the concrete mixing stations on the northern construction side, and that's the same number again on the southern side. One of the prisoners there, the Frenchman, said, like an ogre with an insatiable hunger, the concrete machine swallows 300 bags an hour. There are about 10 of us carrying the bags. Despite the cries and beatings by the supervisors, we can never fill it completely. This goes on day in, day out, times 12, times 2, times 10. These are people who are lugging bags of sand, cement, clay up these rickety stairs that you see here. And it never stops. This is the man who said this, Raymond Portefeuille. He was 18 or 19 at the time. And at one point, he weighed less than these bags that he carried. He weighed 50 kilograms, meaning that would be about just over 100 pounds. So he's a walking skeleton. He is malnourished, he is overworked, he is at the very edge of his physical capacity. That doesn't take much for somebody to die, and that is the point. I mean, yes, on the one hand, you want to exploit labor. No, on the other hand, you have no idea that these are people with an inherent value, with rights and so forth. They exist to feed this machine. But the machine is a capitalist surplus value generating machine. It is not just a war machine. It is both of these things, one because of the other. Now, although this is perhaps one of the bleakest points in this whole machinery, there's also a potential for effective sabotage. If the mixture wasn't right, and especially if you let out the clay, then it might clog up the pipes because the concrete goes hard before it reaches the point where it's being poured. Or you might otherwise interfere with the mix and thereby adulterate the resulting concrete. Shame if that would happen, considering just how much they poured into it. The political leadership, however, was not concerned. When Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, visited the site in late 1944, he said, the work is going splendidly and, thank God, has progressed so much that British-American air raids can no longer cause serious damage to the construction project. Until they could. So here you have the northern side. Previously, we were looking into the well-preserved, now partitioned by a big plexiglass wall, memorial museum site. This is the northern view. And here you see, in particular in this picture, there are two pictures. This is the place where a bunker busting bomb of British origin penetrated the roof of the bunker in late March of 1945. At a place where the second top concrete layer had not yet been laid. So it was complete happenstance that this bomb that had this capacity hit at a place that was not yet reinforced. Or maybe somebody had managed to adulterate the concrete just good enough for this result to happen. The triumph, if any, or the relief was short-lived, however. Like with every place where the immediate purpose of the inmates was no longer given because, you know, in this case, the construction project was abandoned right then and there. People had it. I mean, you already could hear the Allied guns basically from up the river. So clearly the idea that this facility would turn around the war wasn't going to happen. So people who were not inmates just went home. However, the SS that ran the camps made sure to march the surviving inmates to different camps. And the point of the march was not just to take these people away from the reach of the Allied forces who might liberate them. It was also to kill them. So these were death marches, and many of these columns of inmates marched through Germany in the final weeks of the war. Many concentration camps were emptied in this fashion, and if people died on the way, which many did, that was part of the purpose. Meanwhile, the engineering office in charge of the project charged the German government to the amount of 12,000 Reichsmark as compensation for the damage done by the air raid that punctured the roof. Everything must be in order, and of course they had illegal entitlement to that compensation. The letter is dated May 3rd, 1945. It is signed with German greeting. That is the formal letter version of the raised right arm that is accompanied by the shout Heil Hitler. The inner city of Bremen, the old downtown, which is about 20 to 30 miles upriver, had been liberated by the British on April 27th. Hitler had shot himself on April 30th, leaving Admiral Dönitz in charge, the leader of the Navy, who took up residence in Flensburg. The location of the bunker itself was not liberated as late as May 6th, and capitulation took place on May 8th, which happened to be my uncle's birthday. He took that personally. Was very happy with that result. Yes?
So was that bunker like the very last stronghold that
they didn't defend it? It had no real features that would have made it a defensible position. Besides, I mean, there was really not much of an army left. And while there was quite a bit of fanaticism when before the Allied forces came in, like people who would blow up and scorch the earth, blow up bridges and so forth, the official army position was leave no stone on another. Hitler himself, as you may well be aware, said, well, if the German people did not cut it by virtue of their racial superiority, maybe they are not the alpha predators that I made them out to be, in which case they deserve to die, all of them. So let's burn the food, let's tear down the bridges, and let's make sure that this miserable collection of cowards perishes, because they don't deserve it, otherwise they would have won the war. That's the logic of social Darwinism and racial ideology, of course. The interesting thing is that many of the field commanders still carried out these insane orders. Others had the good sense of reporting that they had carried them out, and then, you know, going about their own business. But you can perhaps imagine the sense of relief once British troops rolled into Bremen. And here you have actual slave laborers in the southern end of Bremen. Early on, this is no sound footage, who greet the British as they come in. So those who had survived, for them, this was like another birthday. Some of the local population was apparently sullen to the point of hostility, but the slave laborers were grateful. So this concludes the first part of this lecture. And I want to switch focus and kind of go back to the origins of this story, and under a different title, Death by Labor, which is also what people titled one of the exhibits at that bunker in Fargo.